Are good power systems overrated? Dandadan is a massively mainstream anime with great fights, but it really doesn't have a power system. There's different abilities and some rules, but it's not nearly as nuanced as the new power system in gachiakuta. Gachiakuta is more in line with classics like Hunter x Hunter and JoJo, or more recently Jujutsu Kaisen. And up until now, the assumption was every big anime needed some big power system, but Dandadan has plenty of insane powers and we barely know how they work. Which raises an important question. Are power systems actually overrated, or is there something else going on? So in this video, I want to compare the power systems in Dandadan and gachiakuta, discuss the pros and cons to having an unconventional power system, and explain why the only way to beat the best power systems is to not use one at all. Now let's start by addressing the main difference between Dandadan and gachiakuta. Gachiakuta clearly has a hard power system, while Dandadan has a soft power system. And let me just quickly explain what I mean so that we're all on the same page. In fantasy, fans refer to what are called hard and soft magic systems. I believe the term was coined by Brandon Sanderson, but I could be wrong. Basically, a hard magic system is one that is very clearly defined with a certain amount of structure, whereas a soft magic system gives you as little detail as possible. I say power systems, but there's no real difference. We just say power systems in anime and manga. So for example, gachiakuta is closer to a hard power system because readers can easily explain how the powers work. People called gifters can wield items that they are emotionally connected to. That connection allows them to transform the item, giving them special abilities. But if you destroy the item, you destroy the abilities as well. It's very straightforward, even though there's plenty of other details. But Dandadan is not straightforward. Well, it is and it isn't. Dandadan has a power system, but it's not easy to completely explain. That means it's more of a soft power system. And the reason that's actually kind of puzzling is because all of the best battle shonen have hard power systems. Hunter x Hunter, JoJo, the Big Three, even Dragon Ball, a series that often seems like it's just making stuff up, would technically be considered to have a hard power system. And yet, Dandadan doesn't have that, and it's still got great fights. Here's what I mean. In Dandadan, there's different families of abilities. Okarun represents the yokai-based abilities. There's yokai with special powers. Sometimes they're limited to a certain territory that they possess. They can even fuse together. And in the case of characters like Okarun, you gain that yokai's powers when they possess you. Momo represents the much smaller family of what I call psychics. Basically, these characters have some kind of supernatural abilities that do not come from yokai. As far as I can remember, there's really only three: Momo, Gigi, and Seiko. Momo and Gigi were born with psychic powers and can train to improve them. It's not clear if Seiko was born with her powers, but she relies on the local gods that she's connected to. So for example, she has one god when she's home. If she leaves home, then she has to make another contract with that territory's god. So unlike Momo, most of, if not all of her powers rely on being in certain territories. Finally, there's the aliens and cryptids family, which is exactly what it sounds like. These are aliens or mysterious creatures that do not have spirit-based powers. They just have weird abilities that we don't really know about. But to that point, we don't know that much about the other two groups. In the 200 chapters of Dandadan, there's been a surprisingly small amount of explanations. But real quick, before I say more on that, make sure to check out one of my next live streams. I review new manga chapters every Sunday, Monday, and Thursday, and I even review Dandadan every Monday. But like I was saying, we get a bunch of little rules here and there, but they're barely even rules. They're more like principles. So for example, we know that spirits have aura, and if they lose or give away all of their aura, then they just vanish. But that's never really had a lot of applications. We also learn from Turbo Granny that you can improve your fighting skills by moving to rhythms, but it never gets brought up again. The closest thing we get to like a real rule is when they explain something about spirals, which opens up a whole rabbit hole into all kinds of theories like spirals being used in other series like Gurren Lagann or Steel Ball Run. But again, this is something we haven't seen or heard of since, meaning the whole spiral thing is there, but it's not really explained. And for the most part, this is as detailed as the power system gets. Like, we know yokai have abilities because they are by definition supernatural, but beyond the whole aura thing, we don't know how their powers work. Same thing goes for the psychics. We also know about this thing called empty space, but that doesn't really apply to any of the abilities or power scaling. And in any other battle series, this would ruin the story. Anytime you have a jump series where they don't explain how the powers work, it either makes the fights really boring since readers don't have anything to engage with, or it makes the fights convoluted because they don't have any limits on their powers. Granted, there is such a thing as over-explaining the rules, which can also kill a new manga, but more often what happens is a writer relies on stuff that's already been done in other manga. It's like, oh, well, I'll just put transformations and aura because people like that stuff. But they don't put the time and energy into giving readers something they haven't seen before. And that should be what happens to dandadan. Katsu doesn't really have an original power system. Aura and Spiral have both been done, and there's no intricate rules or friction to make the power system fun to engage with. Basically, the fights shouldn't be nearly as fun as they are, but they are fun. Like, really fun. And that is because dandadan has something that almost no other power system does: mystery. Now, I'm sure a lot of people hear that and immediately think, what are you on? Plenty of battle series have power systems with mysteries. That is very true, but that's not the kind of mystery I'm talking about. So to explain what I mean, let's look at gachiakuta again. Because gachiakuta is a hard power system and it also has some mystery, but the mystery it has is very different from the kind of mystery in dandadan. So like I said before, gachiakuta's power system is very easy to understand and explain. It may not be as nuanced as something like Nen or Stans, but it's a perfect example of a hard power system. As a result, you engage with its power system like you would a more traditional battle series. You think about the rules you're given and how they apply to the fights. You make theories about how they could be used in other applications. But, most importantly, you make theories about the stuff that hasn't been explained yet. In gachiakuta, Rudo stands out because he's the only person we know that can transform just about anything he touches. At first, it seems like an anomaly, but then we find out the true nature of his ability. But once we find out about it, we're given a bunch of questions like, why is Rudo different? What is the extent of his abilities? Are there other characters like him? This is more or less the same feeling we get with any hard power system. With a series like gachiakuta, we engage with the power system through rules and the layers to those rules. Gachiakuta does a particularly good job of this because it explains the power system in levels. Rather than just dump everything on you at once, it reveals layers as you progress through the story, kind of like a video game. And it also does a great job of tying those layers into the story and its characters. So for example, there's reason to believe Rudo's powers have something to do with his family, and we find out that Rudo's family has a bunch of connections in the world. So as we learn more about the powers, we're learning more about the lore as well. This is the main appeal of a power system like gachiakuta's. When done right, it creates this sophisticated interplay of powers and world building, and it gives readers the opportunity to play with all of the rules on their own. But that's the upside. The downside is that this creates very clear limits. For example, gachiakuta is pretty clear on the whole you need an item to have powers thing. So if you want to make a theory about Rudo, I don't know, unlocking some kind of Super Saiyan form or something, you can do it because it hasn't been completely ruled out yet, but the odds of that happening are pretty low because that's just not how the power system works. While there are unknowns in the story, there isn't a lot of flexibility in this power system in that sense. And that is what I mean when I say dandadan isn't like other power systems. The downside to a soft power system like dandadan's is that the lack of rules limits the amount of material you can use for something like power scaling or comparing characters. You can do it, but all of the feats are just based on whatever happens in the moment. Tatsu isn't just making stuff up on the fly, but like we showed before, the few insights that come up rarely ever apply outside of their introductions. But that's the downside. The upside is that this leaves a ton of room for imagination. For example, we just had an arc about a fight on a plane. I won't go into detail for spoiler reasons, but manga fans described it as the most dandadan moment ever. And that's because it had all of these brand new applications of abilities that we never saw coming. That is the beauty of dandadan's power system. On the one hand, there's really no incentive for power scaling, but on the other hand, because there's this vacuum of rules, it allows readers to make the rules on their own. And that's why I say that dandadan uses mystery in such a fun way. The whole reason Tatsu made dandadan, besides the whole romance thing, is because he's really into the occult. And the point of something being occult is that it's a mystery. We have hints and pieces of information, but we don't know the big picture. That's why you kind of need a soft power system in dandadan. You're dealing with stuff that hasn't been properly discovered yet, so you need that balance of kind of knowing just a little bit, but never quite understanding really how everything works. But it does work, because every time there's a new arc, fans come up with all kinds of theories for what the next weird powers are gonna be. And unlike gachiakuta, or a series with a hard power system, dandadan lets you make up whatever you want. Now, like I said before, this does seem problematic, because the best shonen work because they give you carefully balanced power systems to hold characters accountable. But the reason this isn't a big deal in dandadan is because it's not a battle series. It isn't like gachiakuta or JoJo or Hunter x Hunter. It is only just now that fights are slowly becoming more important. For most of the story, fights shared the spotlight with the romance. And that's why you can have a soft power system that works. The key to beating the best power systems is to just not have one. If you have a story like dandadan where you want cool fights, but you don't want the story to be entirely driven by the powers, then you have the option to just not have any limits. The best way I can put it is like this. Gachiakuta is like a puzzle, whereas dandadan is more like a paint canvas. The puzzle is limited, but the fun part is seeing how everything fits together. A paint canvas is empty, but the fun part is that you can make it as detailed or as simple as you want. And I used the canvas example because if you're going to do a soft power system, then it has to be done like dandadan. Dandadan adds little details but never attempts to structure everything. At least not yet. If I give you an empty canvas but then I sketch a picture for you to fill in, well then that's not painting anymore. Now I basically just gave you a coloring book for grown-ups. And if that's what you want, then that's fine. But that would be more of a puzzle. Point being, the reason dandadan works is because it doesn't try to have structure. Tatsu loves the mystery of yokai and cryptids, so he leans into it. Is it better than a hard power system like gachiakuta? No, it's really up to you. If you like power scaling and testing the rules, then you probably prefer gachiakuta. But if you just like making shit up, then you probably prefer dandadan. Neither of them are inherently better, but they both give us one important takeaway. If you're making a power system, don't try to be both. And that's why gachiakuta and dandadan both work. You can either learn from the greats and use that to make your own thing, or you can decide to make your own game. But maybe I'm wrong. Which style do you prefer? How would you describe these power systems? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to think down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And make sure to become a channel member. You'll get badges and emojis to show off in the weekly live streams. You can pick which series I cover next, and you can even get credited in future videos. Also check out my other dandadan videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.